Should intelligent design be taught alongside the theory of evolution in the public school system? We have a story about one teacher who was fired for refusing to stay neutral on the subject. Also, did you file a federal income tax this year? If so, chances are you paid more in your time and money than ever before to do the government's accounting. All that and more when we come back on Free Minds TV. Welcome to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. I am Toby Islin.
And I'm Nick Michaelevich.
All right, we've got a lot to get to today. A lot of it's going to have to do with government spending and taxes. Earlier this week was the tax season, and time to file your IRS government paperwork. I don't know if you filed yours, Nick. I know I begrudgingly filed mine, so we've got a lot to talk about that. In the second half of our show, we are going to be joined by Rob McLaughlin to talk about somewhat more local issues having to do with school votes and budget issues here in New Hampshire. And then finally, in the last segment, we'll be getting to some more teaching kind of stuff. Should intelligent design be taught alongside the theory of evolution? Should teachers be fired if they refuse to teach intelligent design? I don't know. We'll be talking about that. But first, taxes. April 15th marked the deadline to file your federal income tax. I had an accountant do mine because there's no way I'm going through the thousands of pages in tax laws to do it myself. I think that I just probably lose more money than I'm going to get to pay an accountant to do it, and a lot of headaches. So I know I had an accountant file mine because I'm just not going to do it, which costs money, of course. And what this has to do with is how much are we paying in order to do the government's accounting. They can't just give a number, you owe us this much. They make you figure out how much you owe. And if you mess up, well, you're liable for that. Well, it turns out that people are paying more in their time and money than ever before. It takes an average of over 26 hours for your average American to file their taxes, and over $200 of their money just to do the government's accounting. This is money that they're asking for you, but they can't give you a bill on. It turns out the average taxpayer pays over $200. The average self-employed taxpayer is paying over $444 to just file taxes. Is this insane? I mean, why are we paying so much money to do the government's paperwork?
Well, the tax code is very complex, and people have talked about streamlining it for a long time, but it doesn't happen. And it's a lot of money for people. A lot of people have withholdings, so they don't really have to cut a check.
That's how it works for me. You feel good about it because you get money back.
Your money's
right?
coming back. It's like you're getting back part of what they took from you, generally.
A small part. At least for me, it was a very small part from what they took.
But it's still just the fees that are involved, whether you have an accountant do it or the amount of time lost that you could have been working. It works out to, a few $100s. That's depending on who you are and how complicated your taxes are. But that's a lot of money for a lot of people to have to pay, every April.
Well, the government's trying to make us feel a little bit better because we have this refund coming back. Each person's supposed to get, what, $600 from the federal government?
6 or 3, I think it depends on
Between
who you
3
are.
and 6. Well, that's nice because we're paying more than that to do your accounting sometimes.
Right.
We're paying, your average self-employed person's paying $444 to do the government's accounting. They're only getting, what, $300 to $600 back in the refund. So really, we're not winning after this. The government's paying out $70 billion in these refund checks. But corporations alone are paying $170 billion just to file the paperwork. Just to file paperwork, it costs corporations $170 billion. General Electric in 2006 filed returns equivalent to 24,000 pages long, 24,000 pages of accounting just to pay the government.
I'm not surprised by it, but that's a lot of paperwork when you think about it.
In the private sector, it's estimated that people pay $96 billion in their time alone to file taxes, as well as $28 billion on software to file their taxes. This is huge. All this stuff is being done because the government doesn't want to do their own work. You're doing the government's accounting for them, and you're paying for it. Makes you kind of wonder, how much is this tax return really worth? How much are we really getting back? Nick, I know you've got a story that kind of goes along line with this. It has to do with tax system in general throughout history. This alone made me angry. I think what you have to tell me is going to make me even angrier.
Well, for people who are familiar with the Bible, some people are, some people aren't, but the Israelites in the Old Testament were living in Egypt under the pharaohs, and they were oppressed. But going through the biblical account of what was actually required from them by the pharaohs, it turns out they paid a lot less than Americans did. And it's a worthy reflection to take at this time of the year, because a lot of people just paid out money, and a lot of Americans don't think their taxes are that bad, largely because we have withholdings. You don't pay all at once. It's really, you're getting your money back. So people don't realize how bad it is. But under the pharaohs in Egypt, the Israelites were required to pay 1/5 of everything they owned. It was a flat 20% tax. By today's standards in America, that's actually not that bad. The top tax brackets right now are about 35% in many, and that's only for federal income tax. When you factor in all the other taxes you pay.
Gas, property.
Gas,
Some people pay state income taxes.
Yeah, some people pay state income tax and sales tax and property tax. It adds up to much more than the 20% that was required of them. And the warning that was given by Samuel in the Bible was that if you started to give a king more authority than God, in the
more
Bible,
than 10%, right?
In the Bible it calls for you're supposed to give 10% of what you earn to your church, or basically to God and good works. But if you started to give a king that much authority, it would end badly for you. He'd take more and more. He'd take your sons from you, more of your land. You end up without much of anything. And he even said, on that day, you're going to call out for God, and he's not going to hear you, because this was something that they supported at the time.
Well, I'm not a religious person, but I got to agree with this. It makes perfect sense. If you are paying more money, of course the government's going to want more from you. They're going to pass more laws. They're going to take more of your kids and send them off to wars and stuff. So, I mean, the man's right. What we've got to do is trim the government back down to size.
But the problem is, right now, people don't realize that they're oppressed. In retrospect, they wrote of this 20% taxation as something horrible. But compared to the U.S. now, if we went to a 20% flat tax for everything,
boom, that's awesome.
It would be a great improvement over what we have now. So people need to recognize tyranny when they see it.
And people who are saying, well, that's what the fair tax does, well, no, that's well over 20% that there's proposing for this generalized so-called fair tax. It's a fair tax, income tax that would be well over 20% that would get rid of the IRS. So that's no good either.
No, I think we could get a government that could run on 10% of the economy easily.
And that would be a much better government than this huge behemoth we have. Speaking of a huge behemoth of a government, what's downsizedc.com suggest we do to downsize it a little bit, trim it back this week?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch is also dealing with taxes, but with a little twist on it. They sent out a letter from a man who makes about $35,000 a year working for a nonprofit agency. And according to what he's read, that makes him lower middle class. But he felt poor this year after tax season because he had about $12,000 worth of medical expenses, which you can't really fully deduct. And this is something where he would like to see Ron Paul's health care bill. Ron Paul has put forward a health care proposal where it would allow you to save much more of your money tax-free in a health savings account, which means that you're still in control of your health care. You still have the choice of which doctors to use. It has nothing to do with socializing the healthcare system. But it simply means that if you put aside $4,000 or $5,000 in a health savings account, you get to deduct that from what you owe the federal government for taxes. And it's a good way to keep a free market in healthcare and still reduce the costs for lower class people and middle class people, because healthcare costs are going up. And right now the government doesn't really have built into the tax code a way that you can save. Now, we've covered Ron Paul a lot on Free Minds TV. Obviously, he would like to see the income tax go away completely, and in that case it'd be a non-issue, because the money you save on your income tax you could probably pay for some good health insurance and quite a bit more with that. But go to downsizedc.org if you think the government should do more to make credits for healthcare costs for the average American, so that they're not paying all this to the federal government to basically waste it on pork programs, military spending. This way they get to save it and use it for things that they need to pay for, like healthcare.
Well, I'm going to pretty much say yes to any downsizing of the federal government. I think that we could probably actually live without it even. Maybe there for a little bit of military and protecting us at home in case we're attacked by another country. But other than that, we don't need this huge behemoth. So if we're spending money, we should at least get to write it off on our taxes and pay less to this gigantic, enormous federal government. All right, when we come back, Rob McLaughlin, a former school board member here in Keene, New Hampshire, joins the show to talk about lowering the vote threshold. What would happen if Molly Kelly's bill passed in New Hampshire and we no longer needed such a big supermajority to get school bonds issued through? We're also going to be getting to much more when we come back. Stay tuned.
You never worry about the government listening to what you say in public. So why should you have to worry when you pick up the phone? You'd be surprised how easy it is for the government to listen in on your phone calls.
Hello?
Anyway.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. I am Toby Islin.
And I'm Nick Michaelovich.
All right, we've had him on the show many times, Rob McLaughlin. He's a former school board member right here in Keene, New Hampshire, who's always going after the nickels and dimes, trying to help out the taxpayer as much as possible. Because I don't know where you are in your part of the country, how your schools are funded, but here we do it through property taxes, huge property taxes, to pay for our schools here. And if you let the people on the school board just go with whatever they want, our property taxes would be through the roof. So what we need to do is have people like Rob trimming it back. Well, Rob joins the show to talk a little bit about what would happen if Molly Kelly's bill that we've been talking about, lowering the vote threshold, no longer needing 67% supermajority down to 60% supermajority, would do in passing some of these issues and raising the property taxes. Rob, we also went on to do an extended interview, which will be on the members section at freemindstv.com, as well as running here on Cheshire TV. So if you want to watch that, stay tuned to Cheshire TV if you're a local viewer. Otherwise, join the members section, get more content. Let's take a look at Nick. You sat down with him a few minutes ago. Let's take a look.
We're here with Rob McLaughlin. We had been talking a little bit about some local Keene issues as far as school funding goes, structural issues with the Keene Middle School. But we'd like to touch on an issue that might be affecting people across New Hampshire when it comes to their local school districts in the short-term future. Now, the proposition is on the table before the state legislature to reduce the amount of voters it takes to pass bond issues for schools down to 60% from the 66% that's currently required. Right now it's a pretty standard supermajority, and largely one of the major backers of the effort is our local state senator, Molly Kelly, who would like to see that threshold reduced. And Rob, could you tell us a little bit how you think this will affect bond issues for schools? Because it's been an issue here in Marlborough, New Hampshire, where they had a simple majority of more than 50% of people wanted to vote for a new school. But clearly the law, as it currently is, says you need a 2/3 majority to pass such an issue. So it got kind of in the situation where the majority kept forcing a total of 9 votes. Which isn't all that uncommon in these kinds of things, but they kept getting turned down until finally they got the answer they wanted. How do you think this, if the law is changed to a 60% threshold, how do you think that'll affect bond issues at the local level in New Hampshire?
Well, I think the funny thing, you mentioned the Marlborough situation, it seems like democracy maybe run amok as to why you'd have 9 votes in a very short period of time. Clearly with the laws that are in place, the public said no, so then it went back to the school board who said, well, let's try that again, and no, again, no, again, no, again. When does that cease being democracy and just, vote until somebody doesn't show up at the polls and then you get your way and you put it through? Very interesting. Now, I don't live in Marlborough, so, they have to live with the result of that issue. However, I think what happens primarily is to protect the integrity of the public's position on spending it for large capital projects is you need a supermajority, the 67%, only because you have such a huge portion of the voters in the communities that are directly affiliated with the schools, the unions, related, someone's kids, their families employed. So you have a fair amount of people that are going to show up at the polls anyway on that side of the issue. to protect the public's free will, I think you really have to stick with a supermajority. Now, there is the option that they could become an SB2 town, but they didn't pursue that. So you have to wonder, you know, well, why select this remedy of just changing the rules because you didn't like the result? You already had a remedy of becoming an SB2 if you wanted to be a 60% majority. Why would you just not do that? At this point in time, Senator Kelly has not been in office that long, but we seem to be in a position with another one of her issues that we're going to end up with a lot less money in the Monadnock region for school support. So perhaps she should focus on that and worry less about the technical aspects of the votes and worry about getting money specifically to the school districts like her predecessor did.
Well, yeah, you'd think if you're going to be losing state support as far as local schools go, making it easier to pass large spending issues, it doesn't line up. If you're not getting as much money, maybe it should be harder to pass the larger spending items. But I think you raise a good point about the educators and members of the union, members of their families, tend to turn out, and I can't blame them for, they have a self-interest, they have a vested interest in the vote, and obviously they have a right to vote like everyone else. I can't blame them for that. But it's important to keep in mind that the people who regularly come out to vote on school issues are members of the unions and, of the district staff. So there is kind of an imbalance there. To represent the public in general, what I've heard in Keene mostly are people feel that the district hasn't been responsible in the way it spent its money, and they tend to throw money at problems when there might be other remedies. And I don't think there's a whole lot of support for increasing budgets right now, especially with the economy the way it is. Taxes in Keene certainly aren't low compared to anywhere else in the state. So a lot of people, I've heard people complain about property taxes here, but there's a reason that property taxes are higher here than virtually every other developed place in the state. It's largely because of the amount of money that's put at the school district. And everybody wants to have a good school district locally, but there's a question about, do they always need that much money thrown at it to make it better?
Right. And I've got one last point, if I could share it.
Absolutely.
We constantly talk about this argument's always misdirected to, well, if we just had an income tax, we would have no problems. Or a sales tax, or some combination of other broad-based taxes. And property tax may not be the fairest way to do this. Completely agree with that. However, we have a spending issue. We have a spending issue, and right now, at least, we have the local property owner minding the store because they're feeling it. If we end up in a situation where it's just some broad-based thing, it's statewide, and we lose local control, there'll be absolutely no brakes on the spending. And at that point in time, then we will really spend money like it's going out of style. And you'll notice one of our other state representatives, Representative Dunn, is a huge advocate of let's get to a fairer tax base, let's get rid of local property taxes, let's go broad-based. Representative Dunn was a teacher for years. His significant other, his wife, president of the local union. So it's widely supported from the union base that sure, let's go broad-based. Then there's really literally no control on a local level.
Well, it also, it centralizes the lobbying power of teachers' unions, because instead of having to go to all the different school boards, they go to the state legislature, and it's much harder for an individual citizen and taxpayer to get control of a statewide tax through their representatives. Even though we have very good representation here in New Hampshire through our legislature, it's much easier to do it on a local level, and it's more flexible to the individual needs of the district, which I think is lost on a lot of people. And as far as the fairness of the property tax goes, you can make arguments both ways, but no tax is really all that fair. It's something you have to pay whether you want to or not. So whether it comes out of your income or your property tax or a sales tax, it really makes a little difference. I think it always affects people, certain people more than others, and you can make the case that the property tax is hard on the elderly and families that are starting up. But you can argue that the income tax will damage business, damage employment in New Hampshire. You can argue the same for a sales tax will damage our economy. So no matter how you fund it, I think the issue is on the spending side, how much you spend and how much control the individual taxpayers have. And right now, having a local property tax system, it's really the best system as far as local taxpayers. That's what I think. So, but thanks for coming on, Rob, discussing these issues with us, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And if you want to see a little bit more about what Rob has to say, talking more specifically about some certain school issues and budget issues happening here in Keene, New Hampshire, if you're not watching this on Cheshire TV, log on to the members section at freemindstv.com. It's only $3 a month, $30 a year, offers all sorts of bonus, not only bonus extended interviews, but also bonus podcasts, bonus Free Minds TV episodes, all sorts of stuff, all the archives, freemindstv.com. All right, when we come back, should intelligent design and evolution be taught side by side? Should science teachers get to make any kind of decision? Should parents get to make any kind of decision? We have an interesting story that I think you'll enjoy when we come back.
Log on to freemindstv.com for archives of the show, the Free Minds Radio podcasts, show content and the forum, ways to donate, the members section, contact info, and a whole lot more, all at freemindstv.com.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you today is Toby.
And Nick.
All right. We've been talking a lot about budgetary issues and education. Right now I want to talk a little bit about parental choice when it comes to education. Because one thing is clear, you don't have a choice when it comes to pay for it. Everybody's going to pay for it. When we have this huge government that we have, we're expected to pay for other people's education. I don't know why. It seems like welfare for the middle class to me, but we're expected to. I mean, you can't get around paying for it. What about the choice? If you have kids and you're sending them to school, how much choice do you have over what they learn? What we found is not so much, especially when it comes to science and whether it comes to evolution or intelligent design. Now, I'm not a religious person. I believe in the theory of evolution, but I know a lot of people out there don't. But with this one system we've got out there, it's really tough. It's making it so that certain parents don't get the proper choice that they need. It's also making it tough on science teachers who say, I'm teaching science. Intelligent design is not science. Some schools and some school districts are forcing teachers to teach them side by side and remain neutral. We have a story about one woman in Texas who was fired because she said, I'm teaching about science, not about religion. This is a science class, not church. Let's take a look at this woman's story.
New York Times, December 4, 2007, editorial, Evolution in Texas. Is Texas about to become the next state to undermine the teaching of evolution? That is the scary implication of the abrupt ousting of Christine Comer, the state's top expert on science education.
I was just doing my job. I just forwarded an email of an upcoming lecture, and that was the simple fact of it. Then I got a phone call from my immediate supervisor, and she said, we're having a meeting tomorrow, and we need you to be there. I said, absolutely. So imagine my surprise when I get there and they give me a memo of termination. When it first happened, I was so embarrassed I didn't want anyone to know. I was going to go quietly into that good night, but I felt like I had to fight. And they said, I have until 8 o'clock the next morning to either sign a letter of resignation or I would be terminated. They actually said that I had to be neutral about the teaching of creationism. I went, what? I said, are you serious? This is over creationism? I thought, how can I remain neutral on something that is non-science? I got emails from people in Paris, in Hawaii, in Alaska, in London, and former students contacted me and they said, Ms. Comer, keep on fighting, stand up for the kids of Texas. I used to think it was just a radical fringe group, but it seems like now it's part of the political scene here in Texas now to back a group that is anti-science.
And the woman's name, Chris Comer, I think Comer, or something like that. She's talking about how she lost her job because she wanted to teach science in her classroom. Now, personally, I think that if you're going to be teaching science, it should be about science, but not everyone believes that. Where's the parental choice, Nick?
Well, it's not in the public school system, especially the way it's set up now. You really, it's one size fits all, and the curriculum's the curriculum, and if your kid's going to public school, that's what they're going to be stuck with, whether you want them to or not. Luckily, most school districts are somewhat flexible. I mean, they'll let you pull your kid from a class if you don't agree, maybe teach them something else, but it doesn't give the parents the choice of, you know, if you want to have faith-based religious science class, that's, you know, I'm okay with that if that's how you want your kid to be instructed on it. My experience here locally in New Hampshire, when I went through science class, they sort of did both sides. They said, here's what creationism says. That's not science. If you want to believe it, that's fine. And we went on to the science portion.
Well, your teacher would be fired if they were in Texas for this.
Right, and you know, obviously things vary from locality to locality. But really, with a private system, or at least one that allows parents to choose between school districts, they have more control over what their kids learn. Right now, it's basically whatever's on the menu, that's what you get. There's only one choice, and that's what you're having for lunch, unless you have the money to pull your kid out and put them through private school. But they don't even give you any of your tax money back to do that, if that's the choice you take.
Well, I think that we need to start dismantling a little bit. Let's make public schools actual welfare instead of welfare for the middle class. If you feel differently, let us know. FMTV@freemindstv.com. Also, leave us a message on our talkback line, 206-350-0123. That's 206-350-0123. Also, join us online. We've got all sorts of archives there. We've got the members section. We've got the forum, forum.freemindstv.com. Help us out. Give us a vote, vote.freemindstv.com. If you think the show's worth $1, send us $1 or $2. We'd really appreciate it. It has been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Join us this Sunday for an all-new Free Minds Radio at freemindstv.com. Thanks a lot, and have a great night.